Hello, and thanks for joining us here on Encore. Coming up on today's show. Our city is taken over by printed matter as the annual Livre Paris fair draws readers, writers, and publishing industry insiders to the French capital. And we're joined by Robin Hobb. The best-selling author is bringing her fans the latest and final instalment of the Realm of the Elderling series. The fantasy novel Assassin's Fate is now out in a French translation. She's here to tell us more. Robin Hobb, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You're here in Paris for the Livre Paris fair, where your French fans will be discovering the latest instalment of the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which is Assassin's Fate. Now, with this book, you're wrapping up a series that you've been writing for more than 20 years. A lot's happened to the characters, lots of twists and turns in the plot. It's all very dense. How do you keep up with what's going on in the book? Do you have a system? Do you have a sort of index?
Actually, yes, I do. As I write the book, I keep track of all the proper nouns in a glossary that is set to one side in a separate file on the computer. I have many notes and references so that I can look back at previous volumes. It is not by any means a perfect system, but being able to use e-copies of my books now to go back and search for a character's name, for example, and say, did he have red hair? Was he the left-handed one? It makes it so much easier for me.
Okay, so there is a methodology.
Oh, yes.
Now, given that your book sales passed the 1 million mark years ago with translations around the world, I think we can say that there's some very, very universal appeal in your writing. What do you think that is?
I think that fantasy especially reaches back to the foundation of storytelling. We all know a tale of a young man who goes out to seek his fortune, and whether that young person is in the 4th century or the 20th century, I think that sensation is the same. So when you are reading about a person who is entering into a challenging part of their lives, we all have a way to identify with those characters.
Universal myths and legends, I suppose. Now, as I mentioned, you'll be reading at the Livre Paris fair, where you'll be meeting some of your French readers among hundreds of the authors doing events there at the weekend. Now, to get a little more from the site, we can cross to the fair, where France 24's Richelle Harrison Plesse has been perusing the stalls. Hi, Richelle. This is the 38th edition of the Livre Paris Trade Fair, formerly known as the Salon du Livre. It's an important event for the publishing sector here in France. Can you give us an idea of the scale of this event?
Well, Olivia, authors, publishers and lovers of literature are gathering here over the next 4 days for what is France's largest book fair. More than 150,000 visitors are expected through the doors, meeting and greeting some 3,000 authors from around 45 different countries. Now, the schedule is packed with events, book signings, roundtable discussions, debates, conferences, with much of it centered around this year's theme, Writers Facing the World. Apart from the main stage, where you'll catch all of the big name authors, there are also several smaller stages dedicated to different genres, from crime fiction to comics. Now, Olivia, this is really a massive event that really highlights just how thriving and vibrant, the French publishing industry is in a country where the printed page is respected, writers are revered, and thousands of independent bookstores are still turning a profit, or at least surviving, despite the existence of online bookseller giants. I will add that France is a country of avid readers, with some 400 million books sold every year.
So we can say that it's a really key moment in the calendar for the French industry, but the event's also honouring foreign literature. This year it's Russia, and how are they marking that?
Yes, as you said, Russia is this year's guest of honor. Now, while the country is in the headlines for geopolitical reasons at the moment, and of course the country's presidential elections coming up this weekend, the Russian presence here at the Paris Book Fair has nothing to do with politics. Instead, it's about celebrating the diversity of contemporary Russian literature. That said, politics is creeping in, and we should mention that French President Emmanuel Macron did not visit the Russian pavilion. So let's take a listen now to a couple of Russian authors.
Literature is not a propaganda. Literature is not directed to another political systems, countries, and so on. We writers, we write for us, for our people, and in this way we are 100% honest.
What is around me now, I don't like it. Really, I don't like it, because I don't want Stalin came back.
Now, this year, no less than 38 Russian authors are invited to the Paris Book Fair. Some well-known names, but also some emerging talent as well. Obviously, Russia has a well-known classics repertoire, but this is about shining a spotlight on those writers who are driving the industry forward today.
Now, alongside those Russian authors, hundreds of writers will be working hard at the fair, promoting their books, signing copies and taking part in all the debates and talks. There was some controversy this year in the run-up to the fair about the fact that those authors don't necessarily get paid. How are they dealing with that?
Indeed, a controversy that started with a hashtag on Twitter, Paye ton auteur, which translates to pay your author. Now, many writers were up in arms about not getting paid for the work associated with their appearances, whether that was preparing for a conference, preparing for a debate or a roundtable discussion or a workshop. Now, in many cases, the writers weren't established. They were perhaps plugging their first or second book, and they said they were under a lot of pressure to go along with it, with their publishers convincing them that this would be great exposure. Now, eventually they said enough is enough, and they argued that, hold on, the book fair makes money from us. After all, there is an entrance fee. So why should we be generating all of this content for nothing? So even France's culture minister weighed in, saying it's not unreasonable to expect payment when you're providing a service. Now, after only a few days of this movement gaining momentum on social media, the organisers of the event eventually gave in, announcing that every author who makes an appearance at this year's event will be paid.
Well, another thing that's new at the fair this year is they've given a bit more space to a couple of lucrative genres.
Yeah, that's right, Olivia. For the first time at the Paris Book Fair, more space, as you said, will be dedicated to two lucrative genres. They are crime fiction and young adult fiction. Now, the young adult fiction market has been a multi-million-dollar cash cow for the global publishing industry for a long time now, while crime stories have been the most popular genre here in France for some time. Now, when it comes to the crime genre, 1 out of 5 books sold here is a polar, which is the French word for crime novels or detective fiction. So homegrown writers are really at the forefront of the scene, with some saying it's the French who are really producing the best novels in the genre today.
Well, it seems only logical to recognise it at the fair. Richelle Harrison Plesse reporting from Livre Paris. Thank you very much, Richelle. So, as we saw there, the young adult section at the fair this year is a new thing, and you'll be appearing there for a question and answer session, Robin. Mm-hmm. I notice you're not the only fantasy author to be appearing at this year's salon. Recently, we've seen a bit of a comeback from certain sci-fi or fantasy pieces of work. The very mainstream Disney adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time. The author, Madeleine L'Angle, talked about how it was so difficult to get that book published in the early 60s when she wrote it. Do you think things have changed since then?
Oh, I think definitely that things have changed. I'm much more familiar with U.S. publishing than French, but we are seeing quite a resurgence in how much we occupy on the physical racks in bookstores, and how acceptable it is to read fantasy and science fiction as adults as well as young adults, of course.
Now, your characters operate in utterly fantastical settings. They seem very far from our day-to-day reality, the world we live in. So how do you get inspiration to create these worlds?
Oh, I think that as a writer, we draw inspiration from every event. Anytime you can ask the question, what if, or why is that so, there's a story, and that's always the beginning of a story. And to set it in another location is something that that fantasy is very adept at. It's a way to take the reader out of this world with all of your assumptions and your loyalties and your political systems, everything, and set you down in another world and say, if this were you in this setting, what do you think now? Do your beliefs still work here, or are you being challenged to think about things in a new way? And so in fantasy especially, we can look at some very large questions that would be, in my opinion, harder to consider in mainstream literature.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are similarities between those two worlds, the real world and the fantasy world.
Oh, definitely.
Robin Hobb, thank you so much for joining us today. You can catch Robin at the Livre Paris Fair this weekend alongside a host of other author events. And for those who prefer their words to come with pictures, there's a special exhibition dedicated to the accident-prone French comic strip character Gaston Lagaffe. We'll leave you with a little preview. Remember to check out our website for more arts and culture, and you can keep up with Encore on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.